My name is Máximo Miccinilli. I'm the Energy Director of the Center on Regulation in Europe, known as CERRE. I have the pleasure to have with me Clara Poletti, who is Commissioner for ARERA, the Italian Regulatory Authority for Electricity, Gas and Water. Welcome, Clara. I do really appreciate you are taking part of this short interview. And I'm sure that with your experience as ARERA Commissioner, but also as Chair Board of Regulators for ACER, you will be able to shed some light on the measures you are taking and hopefully help other regulators and other actors to understand the key role of your organization.
Thank you.
Can you remind us when the crisis kicked off in Italy and what kind of organizational measures you took to deal with the COVID crisis?
Thank you. Let me just start by saying that it's a pleasure to be of help. It's important to notice that the development of the epidemic has not been uniform all over the country, because this has an impact when we discuss the measures to be taken and how to adapt the regulation. On 23rd of February, the government decided for the lockdown of 11 municipalities in the northern of the country. Those municipalities were considered as the outbreaks of the virus in Italy, the so-called red zones. It was a step-by-step approach, and then the same measures were extended nationwide. This is something, again, to keep in mind from the regulatory perspective. Since the beginning, we didn't know for certain the length and the duration of the emergency. And so it's very difficult to decide on regulatory measures and on the timeline.
Thank you very much for that introduction. What is clear is that ARERA has been extremely active since the crisis started in Italy. So could you describe shortly the most important measures you have taken for both consumers and operators?
In parallel with the full lockdown of the country, we started issuing extraordinary measures. Of course, it's a work in progress. Every day we are preparing new provisions. It's important that be able to communicate to consumers and operators what you are doing. So we decided to open up a dedicated section of our website on COVID-19 emergency, where all our decisions, related press releases, any ad hoc information to operators are published. Then a special ad hoc task force composed by board members and directors was set up in order to identify the most urgent needed measures in all the sectors that we regulated, are not just energy. And we want to make sure that we have a coherent approach across sectors. And at this point in time, what we see is a strong need for cooperation with other institutions. Looking at final consumers, we decided, first of all, a standstill from the 10th of March to the 3rd of April of disconnections of electricity and gas supply due to a raise of payments for households and both small businesses. We extended by 60 days the deadline for the request of the social bonuses for local income families and consumers in need. We established a special account to provide financial resources for the regulatory interventions made in favor of final customers. These financial resources can be used both for stakeholders, system operators, for the emergency in general. The account is financed by transferring up to 1.5 billion euros from other accounts that are now used mainly to finance renewables, energy efficiency, and other public policies. These resources will then have to be returned to the accounts of origin. So it's just a financial measure. Then the money must go back. For stakeholders, we decided to postpone most of the deadlines for the collection of data. We decided to postpone all inspections and sanction procedures. We are working on our quality of service regulation, because we already know that operators will not be able to meet the quality standards. And here we have a discussion on what should be considered force majeure. For sure, quality of service must be revisited, and then we will have to work in order to go back to the previous standards and give incentives to recover very quickly.
Clara, thank you for that. It seems like you are taking a lot of decisions in this context. How do you cooperate with other national regulators? Is it using ACER, CERRE? How are you managing this?
Cooperation is very important. We are sharing our regulatory best practices, but the cooperation at this point in time is more at CR level rather than ACER. I think probably because the measures that we are taking right now are more related to the retail market, which is more a competence of national regulators and CR. But of course, at ACER level, we are still cooperating very well, and that's another very important part of our cooperation. One point that I'd like to highlight that I'm understanding now is that the independence and the powers of national regulators are different in different countries. So in some countries, regulators are more consulted by government. They don't have direct power in some instances. Whether I think it is important to have enough flexibility to act very quickly on the regulatory side as well. So giving direct role to regulators helps ensuring that the system adapts very quickly. So regulation is a powerful tool, is not able to identify exactly who is in need, so the poor, the richer, or so it's different from the fiscal policy, but on the other side can bring benefit and help to consumers very rapidly.
Thank you. That's very interesting, and I think it clarifies a bit how you are operating and dealing with the crisis with other counterparts across Europe. So do you think that this crisis will represent a turning point in terms of the role that national regulators have to deal with the crisis short term, but also to deal with the structural potential economic crisis that will follow?
Regulators, all regulators in Europe should have autonomous regulatory power. This is sort of a loop, but I think they should be in a position to rapidly adapt the rules, having a direct role. Of course, the role of regulator is more technical, implementing the best mechanism to fulfill and to reach the objectives. The regulator should have the flexibility to decide and implement the tools. This is the role that I foresee for the regulator.
Thank you, Clara. Maybe the very last question before we end this very fruitful interview. Some analysts say today that the COVID-19 crisis is just the prelude to future climate change impacts on our ecosystems and economies, and that the idea of crisis mode will be our new normal. Do you agree with that? And what kind of recommendations you will provide to decision makers in general?
Maybe it's an extreme view, let me say, but something we have learned is that we have to be ready and resilient even to scenarios that we were thinking as very unlikely to happen. We were working on a step-by-step type of adaptation of our system. We are seeing now that the system can be somehow disruptive. And so this is something that we should consider more in our regulation.
Thank you very much, Clara. I would like to conclude now by asking you what message you would like to send to the people who will be listening to you from across Europe.
The message is that we are all together into this. This is a great opportunity for Europe to show that Europe has a value, solidarity.